Hidden danger. Sergeant Draven dragged himself from the twisted hatch of the drop pod, followed by Brother Garrus. The descent vehicle had landed badly and sustained minor but not insignificant damage. With a cursory glance, it was clear that they had landed off course, at the edge of the jungle, instead of near the fortified Bastion command base at its heart. The lush, towering foliage loomed around them like colossal sentinels, their serrated leaves blocking out the sky in a thick canopy. "This isn't even close to the target zone," Draven said. Garrus adjusted the settings on his helmet's visor, running diagnostics to assess their situation. Could have been a malfunction in the drop pod's navigation systems, or an atmospheric disturbance. Draven clenched his gauntleted fists in frustration. "I don't like surprises," he fumed, "and I like being dropped into a death world unprepared even less." The jungle resounded with alien noises, strange cries, distant roars, and the rustling of trees and underbrush as unseen creatures stalked around them. "Do we make a tactical withdraw and get appropriate transport for the jungle?" Garrus asked. Draven shook his head. "No time. Our task has become more difficult, but we shall see it done." He secured the data core that was deemed so important to the war effort and gave the signal to move out. As they moved, Draven surveyed the surroundings with the keen instincts of a seasoned space marine. Garrus, his loyal battle brother of many campaigns, followed closely, his bolter always at the ready. Their steps were synchronized, their movements precise, as they struck out towards Bastion Command. What should have been an important but brief delivery mission became more arduous as the minutes turned into hours. Vicious carnivorous plants repeatedly lashed out at them as they passed, while venomous insects that would have killed a regular man in minutes bit at them. But their ceramite armor deflected these minor nuisances as inconsequentially as a gentle breeze. As they traveled, Draven could see something was agitating Garrus. They had served together for a long time, and the two battle brothers had formed a strong friendship forged in the heat of a century of battle. It was a subtle shift, imperceptible to most, but not so to the watchful sergeant. Garrus's faith in the mission seemed to waver with each step deeper into the wilderness. Draven decided to address the issue head-on. "Is something troubling you, brother?" Garrus hesitated for a moment before responding. "Sergeant, I can't help but wonder if this mission is worth the risk. The jungle is unforgiving and filled with orcs. Would it not make more tactical sense to regroup and return with additional forces?" "Our duty is clear, brother," Draven explained, his voice a low, gruff rumble beneath his helm. "We are tasked with the data core's delivery, and so shall it be." Their conversation was interrupted by a rustling in the foliage nearby. A group of orc warriors exploded from the dense undergrowth in a green tide of brutish fury. Their guttural war cries echoed through the dense jungle, a chilling roar of savagery that signaled the onset of battle. With a malicious bloodlust in their eyes, they closed the distance with alarming speed. They bore crude melee weapons that glinted in the jagged shafts of sunlight that penetrated the jungle canopy. Draven and Garrus stood shoulder to shoulder and opened fire, sending a deadly storm of bolter rounds towards them. The first line of orcs fell to the bolter fire, then a second. In their frenzy, the orc charged over the fallen, trampling what remained of them into the dirt. A third line, then a fourth succumbed before they finally reached the two Astartes. An orc with a horned helm struck down with a monstrous cleaver gripped in both of its massive hands. Draven deflected the blow with his bolter, drew his bolt pistol and fired in its face. Its head snapped back, and what remained of its brains were blown out. He fired again, and the next orc's chest exploded in a shower of gore, its battle cry abruptly transformed into a gurgling death rattle. Garrus took up position behind his sergeant, and with lethal precision, picked off orc after orc as Draven engaged them in melee. With his combat knife in one hand, and his bolt pistol in the other, Draven seamlessly transitioned from one target to the next. But despite their martial skills, the greenskins' numbers were endless. Every time they slew an orc, the jungle's depths vomited forth another. A lucky axe swing from an orc cleaved through a joint in Draven's power armor, causing him to stagger backward and rendering his arm limp and useless. Before the orc could make a follow-up attack, Garrus finished it off with a volley of bolt fire. Draven recovered and slashed out to tear out an orc's throat before throwing his combat knife, which embedded itself up to the hilt in another's eye. "Grenades!" he ordered. He tossed a frag grenade in the direction the orcs were streaming from, and Garrus did the same. They erupted in deafening concussions, sending shrapnel and smoke billowing up into the air as orcs were tossed aside like leaves in a storm. "Switch!" Draven commanded. With disciplined coordination, Garrus stepped forward and drew his own combat knife and pistol. Draven took a step back, taking up his bolter again and fired it, one-handed at the remaining orcs. As more of them fell, the green skin's feral roars turned to pained cries, as their once confident charge turned into a disorganized retreat. They were cut down as they fled, leaving Draven and Garrus alone amidst veritable piles of slaughtered orcs. Draven inspected his wound. His arm had almost been severed at the joint and dangled immovable and impotent. It likely could be saved, but it would be of no use when the orcs attacked again, as they most assuredly would. The battle finally over Garrus turned to face Draven. "Forgive me, Sergeant, but the jungle is a death trap. In your condition, it is foolish to proceed. It risks our lives and the safety of the data core." "You forget yourself, Garrus. We have a long history, you and I, but do not presume too much. We have our orders, and I will hear no more of this," Draven warned him, taking a knee to reload his bolter one-handed. "As you say, Sergeant." "I do say. And should I have to fight through a jungle of orcs, there is no one I would rather at my side than you," Draven said in an attempt to raise his battle brother's spirits. "Mark my words, we will reach Bastion Command before nightfall, with the tale of a victory hard won." As they pressed onwards, the jungle conspired against them, as large patches of marshy ground and thick tangled vegetation impeded their progress. Twice more, orc boys armed with a mixture of sluggers and choppers ambushed them, leaping from dense foliage to charge at them in a blind fury. Each time they were rapidly dispatched, but with each attack, Garrus became more restless. Draven knew exactly what was bothering him, but at least he had the common sense to keep it to himself, Draven thought. Without warning, the earth gave way beneath their feet. The camouflage of leaves and scrub concealing the pit, dug by the cunning orcs, crumbled, and Draven plunged into the deep hole below. Garrus reflexively jumped up, snatched onto a sturdy vine and dangled precariously over the gaping pit. For a moment, bestial orcish laughter echoed through the jungle, followed by a bellowed roar as more orcs raced from their concealed positions. With his free hand, Garrus fired a hail of explosive fire upon the onrushing orcs. "Sergeant, are you all right?" he asked. "I've been better," Draven answered, getting to his feet. The pit was deep, and getting out with only one good arm was going to be a challenge. "How's it looking?" "Nothing I can't handle," Garrus said, as an eager orc threw itself at him. He shifted his weight and swung out of the way. Arms flailing, the orc sailed through the air, missing his target, and fell into the pit. It landed face first in the dirt near Draven, who stomped down on its head with a power-armored boot, pulverizing it into a pulp. A few orcs reached the pit's edge and fired their sluggers down at Draven before Garrus could take them out, their shots ricocheting from his armor with metallic pings. Two more orcs dropped into the pit, but this time they landed on their feet, their weapons held at the ready. Draven discharged his bolter. The first green skin warrior fell, its chest burst open in a spray of gore, while the leg of the second was torn off at the knee, causing it to topple back. As it rolled onto all fours in an attempt to get back up, Draven sprinted and jumped, pushing off of the orc's back to propel himself up and out of the pit. He rolled over the lip, rose up onto one knee, and started firing on the horde of amassing orcs in one fluid motion. With the combined firepower of two Astartes, the orcs' numbers started to dwindle until the attack stopped as abruptly as it had begun. Garrus swung on the vine and dropped down to land beside Draven. I'm getting dangerously low on ammunition, he said. Draven turned to face him. As am I. We should go with all haste. Permission to speak freely, Sergeant? Garrus asked. Denied. Draven stormed off in the direction of Bastion Command. Draven, please. Enough, Garrus. We've come so far it would be faster to push on than to head back now. In the Emperor's name we continue. They waded through a waist-high river of bad-smelling green water before they reached the final stretch of their arduous journey, a sharp mountain climb. The mountain rose up before them like a behemoth, its jagged peaks and Bastion Command concealed by a thick shroud of mist at the top. As their way became steeper, the jungle around them began to thin as they went higher. The vibrant leafy jungle was replaced by uneven terrain covered in loose rocks and slippery moss. Garrus led the way, his armor-clad boots crushing the shale beneath his feet. With a single swift movement, he scaled a sheer rock wall, using his combat knife to anchor himself. He turned, offered his hand, and helped haul Draven up and over the obstruction. They took a moment to look back at the path they had traversed. The jungle had fallen far beneath them, revealing a breathtaking panorama of grey peaks and lush green valleys. The forest canopy stretched out like a vast sea of green, broken only by the occasional glimpse of ancient stone ruins protruding above the tree line. In the distance, the endless expanse of the jungle merged with a sprawling ocean, its waters shimmering under the light of two setting suns. Garrus glanced over at Draven, his expression hidden behind the featureless helmet of his power armor. We will be at the end soon. Stay close, brother, Garrus advised in a flat, factual tone. Draven nodded his acknowledgement. He refused to allow his injuries to be a burden. But the further they climbed, the more difficult the one-armed ascent became. The rocks became slick with moisture, and the jungle's sounds were replaced by the harsh whistling of the wind. Draven's boots suddenly slipped, and his armored form became a living avalanche, crashing and sliding down the loose scree. His world blurred as the relentless pull of gravity dragged him toward the precipice of a cliff. Garrus bellowed his name, but the rumble of stone and gravel was louder. In the chaos, Draven's mind remained razor-sharp. He could not die here, not with his duty unfulfilled. He grappled for purchase, his gauntleted hands clawing for anything solid, the treacherous loose stones ground against his armor as he slid. The fog rushed up to meet him, and just when it seemed like the end was near, his fingers closed around a firm edge, and he came to an abrupt stop. Draven assessed the situation. He hung precariously close to a cliff's edge, the yawning chasm beneath him a stark reminder of the peril he had just escaped. He couldn't see Garrus from here. The fog had swallowed him, but he must have been just ahead. With incredible strength, Draven pulled himself up, inch by agonizing inch, until his body finally lay flat, a safe distance from the edge. His heart thundered in his chest. He unsheathed his combat knife and thrust the keen blade deep into the rocky ground. He wedged his gauntleted hand around the hilt and used the knife as an anchor to drag himself up. He repeated the process over and over as he slowly climbed back up towards Garrus. Then he heard the clamor of battle over the sound of the howling wind. He quickened his pace. He sheathed his knife and pulled himself onto a large flat ridge. Then Garrus came into view. 2 orcs lay dead at his feet, but a massive green skin had picked him up and started to slam his head against a large boulder. "Garrus!" Draven cried as he drew his bolt pistol and fired. The large orc boss turned and used Garrus's body as a shield before throwing it at him. Draven dropped his gun and caught a hold of Garrus before he could be flung clear off of the mountain. But his single arm strained against the weight, and he was forced to unceremoniously drop him to the ground. The massive orc snarled, and sending spittle flying in every direction, dashed forwards. It swung a crude serrated axe with such brutal force it would have cut Draven in half. Draven ducked, and the axe sliced harmlessly above his head. He tackled the orc, driving it backward until they collided with the boulder, causing it to release its axe due to the force of the impact. The orc pounded down on Draven with its fists, its colossal strength driving him to his knees. With his one good arm, Draven struck back, but the orc weathered his blows and delivered its own counterattack, a two-handed punch that struck with such force that it tore Draven's helmet off and sent it bouncing away into the mist. With a second blow to his exposed head, Draven was sent reeling to the floor. The orc boss spat and retrieved his axe. He raised it up, ready to deliver the final killing blow. "Time to die, beaky boy," it said. Unexpectedly, 2 bolter rounds exploded from its chest. The orc boss staggered and looked down at the wounds, momentarily confused. Taking advantage of the distraction, Draven drew his combat knife and stabbed it up under its chin, driving the blade up until it pierced out the top of its head. Then he gave it a shove with all his strength, sending it to tumble off of the mountainside and vanish into the mist. Garrus checked how many rounds he had left in his bolt pistol and limped over to Draven. "I'm out," he said. "The Emperor saw fit to give you enough, brother, and not a round more. We're close. Should be just over the ridge," Draven said and led the way. A few minutes later, they entered a narrow mountain pass. At the far end loomed an imposing structure, hewn into the rocky side of the mountain. Thick rockcrete walls surrounded the structure with a single steel gate, emblazoned with a golden aquila, unguarded on one side. "I told you we would make it," Draven said. "That you did, brother, and for what it's worth, after all these years I never truly doubted that we would. It's just that I'd rather that we hadn't." Garrus paused. "What do you mean?" "Hydra Dominatus," Garrus said and fired his bolt pistol at point-blank range. For Draven, everything went black.